Hi, I'd like to share another way of escaping the prison of your mind, the narrow confines, the walls of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that limit your joy, your aliveness, and the abundance in your life. And I learned this way from the second largest animal in the world, a humpback whale. There was a period in my 20s where I had quite a challenge feeling good. In fact, this one day I had exhausted all the help that coffee could give me. My kidneys couldn't take any more coffee. I had given up alcohol because it made me more depressed instead of lifting me out of the depression. And I'd long since given up drugs because even though they gave me some temporary relief, I could not stand withdrawal and re-entering, going off the effect of the drugs and re-entering the low vibration of the world that I lived in without the drugs. So this particular Saturday in Boston, in my 20s, I couldn't find any other way to shift out of the low vibration, the heavy feelings that I was in. And so I kept remembering a phrase that I'd heard throughout my life from all my teachers: ask and ye shall receive. So I'm like, okay, I'm asking already. Is anyone listening? And as I started to make fun of, really, to exaggerate in fun of this whole quotation of ask and ye shall receive, I noticed a book on the shelf. You could say it kind of stood out in some way, perhaps it glowed, but in some way it grabbed my attention. And it was Walden Pond by Thoreau. And in fact, I very often went swimming in Walden Pond, the real Walden Pond, where Thoreau had built his cabin and had lived in seclusion and had written his famous book. And it was very, very comforting to swim in that pond. It was very refreshing, and I felt very connected with nature and very, very peaceful. However, this particular day, it was pouring, it was cold, and it did not feel very attractive to go swim in Walden Pond. So instead I felt, well, I'll read some of what he wrote when he was there. In a sense, connect with that space. And what I read was a famous phrase of Thoreau, and he was talking about his visit to the great outer beach of Cape Cod near Provincetown. At the very end of Cape Cod Peninsula, there's a beach that's 40 miles long of total emptiness, marsh, beach, woods, but totally natural, wild, never been developed. It's the Cape Cod National Seashore. And at that time it was just wild for him, and he would go there when he really needed to feel freedom, expansiveness, to get out of his prison of his mind. And what he wrote about this place, this great beach, was, there a man could stand and put all America behind him. He was speaking of that beach. A man may stand here and put all of America behind him. And at that moment I could really relate to that, because all of America to me was the first 20-some years of my life, Western civilization, everything that America meant, and what was bringing up my discouragement and my despair. So it was very attractive to feel I could go to a place and put all of that behind me. So even though it was cold and rainy, I took the subway down to the harbor in Boston and took the 3-hour ferry across Boston Harbor out into the ocean to Provincetown. And from there I could walk to this great outer beach that Thoreau spoke about. And when I got to the beach, I walked and there was no one else out there, so it was really empty and isolated. And unfortunately, the seclusion and isolation made me feel even more depressed, more lonely, more disconnected. So I'm like, wow, I prayed, I asked, this came to me, I'm out here, and this isn't working. So then I decided to ask again. I had this little suggestion in my consciousness of keep going. There might be more. Keep asking. There might be more. So I ask again that I might receive help, assistance, be lifted out of the space of despair that I was in. And when I did that, I heard a horn, a foghorn. And I looked out to the foghorn, and there was a boat with a lot of people on it. And it was a whale watch. And even though it was cold and dreary and foggy, there were these whale watches. And I felt, well, I asked, and then I saw this boat, this whale watch. So I acted on that intuition. I acted on that suggestion from Spirit. And I went down, even though it felt kind of silly at that point on such a cold, foggy, rainy day. I bought a ticket and I went out on this whale watch. And sure enough, we were out there for 4 hours and we didn't see any whales. Everyone was very discouraged. Most people were inside the cabin getting warm with coffee and tea. And so there again, I was isolated and alone out on the deck. It was very cold. I felt very desperate again and in my despair. And finally I decided to just lie down on the deck, on the bow of the boat, to just lie down and go to sleep, try to go unconscious until we got back to port. Because we hadn't seen a whale, nothing was shifting. I wasn't feeling any better. In fact, I was sinking even further into despair. And just when I laid my head down on the deck in order to try to go unconscious, to try to go to sleep, right when I laid my head down, all of a sudden this huge, immense shadow in the fog came up. This huge, immense office building came up and totally dominated my view. And then I looked more closely and there was an eye almost a foot wide, 6 inches tall, a foot wide. And I realized I was looking in the eye of a humpback whale. And this eye was looking right at me. Our eyes met. Our eyes might have been 3 feet apart, but at that moment, there was no distance between our hearts. I connected with this immense being. And I had this definite knowing that this being had come in answer to my request, to my prayers. And as I lay there and merged with this being and just dove, fell, melted into his eye, into his being, into the immensity of his being, the vast, open, flowing, calm, peaceful space within this being, I felt a total acceptance, not only of this whale, not only of this animal that had come to help me, but I felt a total acceptance of the space that he lived in, of the earth, all of life. I felt a total acceptance of this environment, this space which before had felt alien and alone and isolated, and I felt disconnected. Now I was feeling embraced. Now I was feeling part of this world, part of the universe. I was feeling union with the whale, with all of the world, with all of life. All of my despair lifted, my spirit soared, and I felt a deep, eternal sense of peace that in fact I have never lost. And any time that I am feeling disturbed and upset or lonely or disconnected, I can go back. I can decide to reconnect with that whale, with that space, to look into the eye of the universe and dissolve into that immensity of love and acceptance. So right now, I'd like to ask you, I know you've had this kind of experience. So if you would, just allow your heart to guide you, your intuition to direct you. You might close your eyes if you want, but just allow yourself to ask and then receive. Ask for whatever you want. Ask for what you're longing for. Ask for what's missing. Ask for something you're not experiencing right now that you'd like to experience. And then let go. You might allow yourself to reconnect with a time when you felt the immensity of the universe, where you felt the beauty and the total acceptance of nature, of another person, of a seashore, the beach, a sunset, a sunrise, a mountaintop, a forest, or your bedroom as a child. Just allow yourself to ask for comfort, relief, for assistance, for transformation. Just ask in your heart and then let go and allow whatever happens to happen. Thank you.